The last policy on the agenda is policy 109, resource materials.
Why is this on the agenda?
There was a request to have this put back on the agenda based on a concern with approval of an approval that violated the policy and concerns that the implementation of this policy is not consistent with the language in the policy. So I don't know if Mrs. Chaikin or Mrs. Blomgren was going to speak to this. I thought it was Mrs. Chaikin.
Can you hear me, Megan?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I think we both have a little bit to say. My concern was two things. So we had a book called Identical that some concerns were raised. It went through the review and it was found to be not explicit. I certainly disagree that it's not explicit. Another concern is, according to the AR, one of the people on the committee is a student. So to me, it doesn't make sense to have a student on a committee to determine if a book is appropriate for students. I didn't realize that we had students on that. I personally think that's something that should be changed. And, you know, I don't know how we can better define explicit, but I struggle with the idea that certain passages in this were deemed not explicit enough. The review itself, the findings of it say certain pages were considered but do not rise to explicit. And who can be harmed? No harm was determined. Descriptions are not overly graphic, and words don't necessarily derive to meet the definition of explicit. And I think Jordan is going to share a little bit more about the verbiage itself.
Okay, right. So part of the review, it said who can be harmed from this book and how, and it said no harm was determined. The following thoughts were shared due to context of the story. Descriptions are not overly graphic, and then in parentheses it said own perceptions, and then words don't necessarily derive to meet the definition of explicit. As I have read it, my own notes to myself were, are you kidding me? There are multiple explicit, here's just mine. So I am going to read just a few excerpts.
There's children here.
I'm getting ready to say, if you do not want your children to hear this, those children want to be excused to not hear the explicit material. I'll give some time, especially for those at home as well listening.
Just before you do that, this book was removed though, so that required parental consent to be able to access the book, right?
No, that's the recommendation.
So that it would be removed, right?
No. What do you mean?
The recommendation after it went through the process was that the book would be removed from general circulation?
Yes.
Yes, it would be
Okay.
cool. No. The recommendation was that it remains in the high school library collection.
But in order to access it, what did you need parental permission to access it?
Yeah, but no, that's not part of the policy. That violates policy 109 anyway. It's not to have
The reason I'm asking that is if we, from a policy standpoint, have removed it so that you needed parental permission to view the book, it would seem inappropriate to read it here.
No,
You know, in this
it's not.
context.
I'm reading it here, and it's not inappropriate because the point is to keep it in the library. Nothing was even elaborated on that to state that a student would go over to it, find it, and then go up and say, I want to sign this out, and then I need parental permission. So no, and it also states very clearly that they do not believe that this is explicit at all. They call it non-explicit. So I also want to read this because again, in my opinion,
I think you can read it, but I don't think that this is the appropriate form in which to do that.
Why?
Because I think there's children here.
That's why I'm giving it out for them to remove themselves.
Okay, well, maybe you need to make it more specific. It just seems like an inappropriate.
Tomorrow they would just
It's
watch
not
it on
inappropriate.
YouTube. Tomorrow they're just going to watch it on
What's inappropriate is
YouTube.
this book to be kept in our library, and it violates policy 109.
Okay, so first of all, there are numerous, we've talked about this many times, that this isn't about banning books, it's about choosing materials that are appropriate for different ages, the same way that we choose what movies our students can see in classrooms and on buses. And if you're reading it that they don't need parental permission, that's not the way that I read Dr. Bolton's email at all. I thought that it was removed and reserved for students that would get parental permission, just in the same way that I remember having to sign parental permission forms for my children to be able to watch excerpts of Saving Private Ryan in one of their high school history classes, which if you've seen that movie, it's, you know, it's intense, and you know, the language, the violence, everything about it.
Saving
but they
Private
didn't-
Ryan has nothing on this book.
Well, excuse me, it's the point that this committee, and to say that it violated policy when the committee did pretty, you know, as far as I could read from Dr. Bolton's email, the explanation of the process it went through, I think you have to be careful when you say that something violated policy. If the people followed the directions that you outlined in your policy, you
Right,
can't very well
explicit
accuse
content,
them of.
sexually explicit content.
Well, I mean,
They're
there's
stating that it's
a book
non-explicit.
that we just talked about last fall, that had something to me that's pretty shocking, but we all of us together up here on this panel, we all decided that it could remain as part of one of our English classes.
Which book was that?
It's the Kite Runner. We said that you can't use the film, but the book remains part of our curriculum. So, you know, it is a subjective thing that you've done. I just want to say, wherever the discussion is going, to start out by saying that, or to imply that people did something wrong, that they violated policy, when they did put it through your review process, I don't think is accurate. Now, if you want to change the policy to make it say something different and strengthen it, that's a different story. But I don't want to come
That's
out
fine, we
saying that
can be
they
more
did that.
specific in it, but I
Okay.
don't know how this is not considered sexually explicit.
You're-
I'll read it, and then that's fine, then you can, you know what, let's do that. I'll read it, and then I would like your opinion. That's fine, I would like your opinion if you believe that this is sexually explicit or not.
My opinion
Okay.
doesn't really matter.
Mom was gone again. Sorry, wait a minute. This one's enough time, I think, for children to get out of the room. Can't exactly remember why, only that we didn't expect her to come home until very late. It was dark in our room, velvety black. Someone had closed the curtain. Kaylee was scared. I tried to tell her not to worry, but just then Daddy burst through the door. I closed my eyes tight, made myself no more than a shadow. Something about him was different. I didn't want that something to find me. I cracked my eyes just a slit as he sat on Kaylee's bed, pulled her into his lap. He smelled of brute and wild turkey, his peculiar potpourri. I love you so much, my little flower. Daddy needs something from my girl, my sweet rose. Will you give it to me? I wanted to be his little flower. Would have given my daddy anything. What did he want from Kaylee? She laid her head on his chest. What? I want you to see something that proves how much I love you. This is only for you, Kaylee girl. He lifted her gently, sat her down on the bed beside him, then he opened the snaps on the thigh of his flannel pajamas. It stood up, stiff as stalagmite. See how much Daddy loves you? Show me you love me too. Touch it. He closed her hand around it. I know it sounds bad, but I wanted to touch it too. I didn't know what it meant, only that it made Daddy happy. I wanted to make him happy too. That's right, that's right. His voice rocked in rhythm with his body. Oh yes, my Kaylee loves me, my little flower. What any of it meant either, but we both knew. Somehow it was important because when Daddy finished, he burrowed his face into Kaylee's hair and wept, confused at his tears and at the sticky stuff icing her hands. Still Kaylee pleaded, Don't cry, Daddy. What's the matter? Didn't I love you good enough? Like he suddenly realized just what he'd done. He scrambled for cover. Yes, you love me good enough. So very good. But it's our secret, okay? Because if anyone knew how much you love me, they'd be jealous. Now, Kelly was really confused. Can I tell Mama our secret? No, especially not Mama. She'd get mad because she doesn't love me like you. She might even go away. You don't want that, do you? Mom was off on a retreat, like any of that spiritual mumbo-jumbo ever did her, any of us. One minuscule sliver of good. Daddy had been back to Kaylee for lollipop licking. My turn. A few times. She had a vague notion that it was wrong, but she wasn't sure why and didn't know who to ask. They'd probably just be jealous. That warm summer night she slept in a thin white nightgown, nightie, nothing more, nothing at all under. The moon full, shimmered against the tan of her exposed skin, and her hair whispered over the pillow like a pale waterfall. As usual, the smell of wild turkey preceded Daddy. In the bright moonlight, you could see Kaylee's cringe in shallow sleep. Daddy crept through the door to the side of her bed, stood looking down for a very long time before stirring her with a volley of kisses. Cheeks, forehead, lips. Oh, little girl, do you know how beautiful you are? No one was ever as lovely as you, not even your mother when she was a child. I can't believe you're mine. Kaylee roused at his words, came into the moment, secure in the aura of Daddy's love. She tried to sit up, but Daddy pushed her gently back down against the mattress. Stay like that for Daddy. I want to teach you something new. He lifted her nightgown, rolled it up over her belly, coaxed her thoroughbred legs apart. She squirmed, a paltry protest. Don't move. Daddy's scarlet face underlined his command. I thought he might smack her. But as quickly as his anger flared, it dissipated smoke. Don't be afraid. This won't hurt. You'll like it, I promise. He kissed the length of her torso down to the small, naked V. It was only his mouth that night. He didn't even ask her to touch him, prove how much she loved him. Afterwards, she worried. Didn't he want her to love anymore? What had she done wrong? And yet he had taught her something new, something awful. Something wonderful, something every girl should know the joy of, though of course she shouldn't learn it from Daddy. At 10, it isn't exactly easy to separate good touch from bad touch, proper love from improper love, doting Daddy from perv. More and more time away from home, we were getting used to it. But that night, something was different. Kaylee and I lay in bed, listening to Daddy scream into the phone. What the fuck do you think you're doing, Kay? It's not just me you're hurting. Come home, I'll forgive you. We had no idea where she was or what she was doing to make Daddy so mad. But whatever she said on the other end did not pacify him. The receiver slammed. The ensuing silence was scary, scarier than his yelling. In retrospect, I understand he had gone to visit his bottles, but he didn't find enough healing there. His footsteps that night were soft, hesitant. I think they even turned around, but eventually they came toward us again. The door opened slowly. Kelly was used to Daddy's visits, but that night she too felt something different in the air. Rage, lust, sorrow, perversion, all mingled in Daddy's sweat. There was nothing gentle about how he threw back the covers, already naked. He pushed Kaylee roughly to one side, flopped beside her. I could tell she was afraid. This wasn't her Daddy. This was a demon, his evil hard and sharp as a steel blade, ready to slice into her. It did. His attack was brutal, bloody, wordless, except for a vicious shut the fuck up at her pitiful scream. A plea to please, please, no, Daddy, no, it hurts. Oh, I cowered, sick at the sight, but unable to divorce myself from the horror. I felt Kaylee's pain, and when Daddy was done, and she cried, I cried too. So do you think that that is not sexually explicit material?
What I would like to understand is why you would need to read it to us, who we already, like I was able to describe, I was able to describe Saving Private Ryan without having to read it, and adults can understand what we're talking about. You chose to read that, and let me read to you, and let me ask you, you were one of the people that said that Kite Runner could remain in the school district. Our policy states explicit written description of sexual acts except for the purposes of teaching students. This is what's no resource materials for high school. This is what I'm reading. So it says no resource materials per this policy shall contain visual or visually implied depictions of sexual acts or simulations of such acts, or explicit written descriptions of sexual acts except for the purposes of teaching students to avoid and report molestation or educating about the procreative sex act or STD avoidance for purposes of science and health instruction. And then here's the part where I think maybe, and this is why, I don't know that it was necessary. Wait a minute, wait, I'm not finished. Wait, no, because that doesn't actually describe it explicitly, but it says permitted but deprioritized sexual content in selecting textbooks or supplemental resource materials for high school students. The selector shall prioritize the materials that do not contain other sexualized content, such as non-explicit descriptions of sexual acts or visual depictions of nudity. Parental consent must be obtained for high school students before assigning any textbooks or supplementary resource materials containing permitted but deprioritized sexual content. So I think what you want to
Textbooks.
can I finish my thought, because I'm going to get there. Thank you so much. So what I think maybe you want to say is that you would change that to something that says parental consent must be obtained for high school students before assigning any textbook or supplementary resource materials, or before students can access materials that have such content. Because I think that there are numerous things in our library that contain content like what you just read. And I do think that it was unnecessary to read it, because we've had these discussions. You sent it, or Dr. Bolton sent us the the emails, and I think that the 9 people sitting up here are adult enough to have a conversation where we could have talked about this and changed this policy. We didn't need that, your reading of that, because we were probably already there with you. That's all I was trying to say.
So, there are different categories in this policy. One is talking about when you're using a resource in health classes or in textbooks or things that are addressing content in a way that is teaching kids something. You're not talking about putting a book like this in the library. That's not what the policy says. There's a separate category, and nowhere does it say leave it in the library, but a parent can let you sign it out. I'm sorry, the fact that anyone would justify leaving this book in there is disgusting.
Well, and if I can chime in, Megan, Joan, to your point about the 9 of us.
Your policy
Hey,
does not.
Turn on your video.
Yeah.
Turn
I
on
don't think she can hear you.
Turn on your video.
What I'm telling you is that your library or your policy does not say what you're trying to say that it says. That's all.
It
This is what I'm
absolutely
telling
says
you.
that explicit content needs to be, that it cannot be in the library if it has explicit content.
Where
And the
does it
review
say
says,
that?
the review says that this content is not explicit.
Where?
I don't understand how this is not explicit. This
Well,
seems
in the
pretty
same way that
explicit.
maybe in the same way that somebody, again, going back to the kite runner, I would consider that explicit. I was horrified. I never knew what that book is what it contained. Would I want my kids did read it.
What's
Would
an
I-
example of that,
Would
Joan?
I want them to read it? We had the discussion about the kite runner. It
An example was
contains
never given.
It absolutely was given. Go back and watch the meeting recordings, because an example was given, and I think we had someone. It was read out loud, or someone described what happens in that film. We absolutely did talk about what that film contains. So please don't try and change history. If you want to change your policy, go ahead and change it. Yeah.
All I can guarantee, Vermillion wouldn't approve this in the library. So, to me, there's nothing wrong with our policy. Our policy says explicit content should be removed from the library. We don't need to change it. It just needs to be enforced, and it makes no
Well,
sense
then why is
that
it
this
on the,
was
but then
approved.
why is it on the policy agenda? If it only needs to be enforced, then
The
that
AR
would seem to
part
be
Because number one, it's not being enforced, and number two,
No.
if
a policy's not
agree-
being
I agree
enforced,
that
the
if-
forum to
I
address
agree
that
that
is
if we're
not a
questioning
public
the
meeting.
content, I agree that if we're questioning the age appropriateness of content, we shouldn't be recruiting kids to read the materials that we're questioning. That doesn't make any sense.
Well, where is that?
Plus, if the recommendation is saying that, the recommendation is to have parent or guardian consent and must be obtained prior to checkout by student. If you need that, then to me, you are stating that it's explicit and it violates the policy.
The policy doesn't allow for it to stay in the library with consent. It doesn't allow for an AR to be requiring kids to read books that are
Who's
considered to
requiring
be
them to read
explicit.
that?
That's part of what they're doing for the committees. The AR violates the policy. You can't have administrative
Okay, well then
regulations that
take the
violate
student
policy.
off of it, but you guys are going back and forth. First, you're saying that there's nothing wrong with our policy, that it's just not being enforced. And if that is the situation, you don't have discussions about a policy not being
I
enforced.
think the point is,
In a
what do we,
public meeting,
what
you address
definition?
that with
It has
with
to be brought up, because if
discipline.
it's not, if there's some form of confusion, it's like bring it to the table then and read it
Do
and
you
see if
want
it does
to
violate
change-
the policy.
But no,
Wait a second. So this book went through the policy, right? Is that correct? This it did.
It went through the
It
review
went
process.
through the review process.
Correct.
And if you're not happy with that, then you have to come up with some change to the policy.
No,
because
no, you have to
yes,
hold people accountable who aren't
No,
following
no,
it.
they followed the policy
didn't.
and they,
No,
maybe
they
you
didn't.
need to define.
But Ron, the point is
because you
that it
can't-
was
they went
deemed
through
not
it and you
explicit,
can't just
and
change
we're
it.
saying that we think it is explicit.
Well, okay, you think it is, and some people
You
Do you
don't
think that wasn't
You don't think it's
explicit, Russ?
explicit?
You know, I think it should be able to be in there and signed out with the parent's consent, because this is something that
Do you think it's sexually explicit?
I believe that it's something that teaches somebody about the horrors of this, okay? And instead
There's
of
way more
more,
in it as well.
you know what?
Way more.
High school kids are seeing a lot worse on their phones than they are in this book. And the minute
But
you
Ron,
mention it,
we've
they
done
don't want
this
to sign
100
it out.
times. The school shouldn't give things that are on phones to kids. There's all kinds of things on phones that we wish weren't, but doesn't mean we
That's why
provide
they
it to
have a
them.
And I
policy, and if
agree
you
with
want to
that.
change the policy, change it. Define explicit differently. Obviously, it means something different to different people. But don't just sit here and.
So
Okay,
that's
so
what you need to do.
So
You
if
need to
apparently people
decide.
don't think that's explicit, can you please provide a definition that you think would help
Yeah.
people
Right.
come to the conclusion that what Jordan just read was explicit?
You want to change it, so come up with that definition.
No,
No,
because
it's not
we think
explicit.
explicit
The
is
policy
clear.
is fine.
You apparently don't, so come up with a definition.
No,
Yes.
I think the committee didn't, whoever went through that. So obviously, you're misunderstanding what they're deciding. So come up with a change.
I asked
They
Dr.
followed
Bolton
them.
specifically, what then, I said I question what then they would consider explicit. I asked that specifically.
Well, fix it.
So fix the policy.
Fix the policy.
Fix the policy or fix your definitions, but decide what it's supposed
Joan, you
to
keep
be.
saying your policy, you were in favor of this, weren't you? Or were you not?
Well, I
good with
did
it?
vote, but I'm not the one that is saying that people violated the policy. Again, I will tell you, if you're going to make a claim, and it's a serious claim, to say that someone violated a policy is a serious charge. And first of all, if they violated the
Then
policy.
you're saying that there's no sexual
if they violated the
explicit content in this
policy-
book, Joan, then you're
No,
agreeing
what
with
I-
that. That's what you're
no,
saying.
No.
You're
what
saying
I'm-
then
no.
that we're being terrible people because we're accusing people that they're not following the policy. You're
No,
saying that's a terrible
not at
thing that we're
all.
accusing that. So therefore then that you're saying that this book is not explicit because it's clearly
No.
in the policy.
No,
Okay,
Jordan, it's not my
Dr.
fault
Scheid.
if you can't understand what I'm trying to say. What I'm saying is that I did vote in favor of this policy. I have never been shy about saying that there are things that are appropriate for children to see and things that aren't. And I have no problem with the school applying the same principle that we use with movies and other things in our classrooms to our library materials. So again, do not try to put words in my mouth and do not try to rewrite history. And don't try to re-explain what I'm saying up here right now. I am telling you that you started this conversation, and Megan, by saying that people violated our policy. They did not violate the policy as we have it worded. So go ahead and come up with changes to the policy if you want to change it. Come up with a stronger definition if you believe that something got lost in translation and what you see as explicit, other people don't see
Again, I'll
it
ask
as
again,
explicit.
do you feel like the content I read was sexually explicit or not? Period.
Of
I'll
course
just
it
ask
is.
what you want
Of
to change
course
about
it
the
is.
policy to
Okay.
fix it.
Yeah, what do
Fix it.
you, now what do you want to change
the
about the
policy?
policy?
But isn't the policy say, even, I agree that it's sexually explicit, but it says it could be utilized to report molestation.
Yes.
It says except written descriptions of sexual acts, except for the purpose of teaching students to avoid and report molestation. Is there any way possible that this resource could be utilized to teach children to avoid and report molestation? Because if it could, then it follows the guideline.
I would agree with that. I believe that.
Do you
But it
not think it
also
has
says-
any ability to teach
It could have
students?
some, but
Okay,
then
if it has some,
listen,
then it goes to the
who
policy.
can be harmed from this book? Many can also be harmed from this book.
That's why
And
you have
that's what's
parental
also been
consent
taken out
then.
as
So
well.
it went through the process.
No,
It's gonna require parental consent.
No.
But it's the only reason it can be in the
Parental
allowed.
consent, it's a library book. They can get that book, the parents can get that book for their kids.
The parents can.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, the foreword of the book, the author says special thanks to Jude, who provided invaluable insight about the psychology of sexual abuse, its victims, and its victimizers. So, I mean.
Well then maybe our policy should say that books that are sexually explicit but potentially help in cases of child abuse should be kept at the guidance counselor's office. I mean, this is a book anybody can just pick up. They have no idea potentially what they're getting into, and it's certainly sexually explicit. I'm not sure. I'm confused how we're arguing about whether it's sexually
I don't
explicit
think
or not.
anybody
But
argued that at all,
Yes,
but
you
go
did,
on.
Jen.
No, I
No,
most
she
certainly did not. I think I said pretty clearly that
I
it's
feel like I didn't hear
again,
you
like-
say, yeah, that's
I
sexually
mean,
explicit,
roll the
and
tape
it
back
should be
just to
addressed in
5
some way.
seconds ago. I love how words are put in my mouth.
It says that if it's sexually explicit, that it needs to be removed. But the evaluation said, so when you say no one's saying it's not, the evaluation of the book said that it's not sexually explicit. That's what
I
she's talking
said
about.
that
So
I
what she's
did not say
asking
that.
is, what language do we need to put in the policy for someone to decide that that is sexually explicit? Because we thought that that was clear.
It says
Apparently
If I,
it's not.
okay, if I had
Purposes of
to, if I had to
That's
guess.
not again,
Can
they
I
didn't,
answer the
they
question
didn't
that
say
I was
that,
asked?
the review didn't say that they were looking at, using it for that purpose. They said that it's not sexually explicit. That's what the language in the review said.
Okay, can I answer the question you asked? If I had to guess, and again, I'm not on the committee and I don't really like putting words in people's mouths, but if I had to guess, where they decided that it was not sexually explicit would be if you compare what was read to the definition, because it says, you know, it wasn't expressly described. So that's where they may have had, you know, this idea that it didn't meet the exact definition of explicit. I think it is, you think it is, seems like a lot of people think it is. But if you're holding to your policy, I would have maybe gone back to the committee and said, hey, like, tell us where we went wrong. How could you not see this as being such?
I wrote that in an email too. I said that very much in the
To the-
email
to
to
the
all of
committee?
us. Yep.
To the committee? No.
To everyone,
And so did
the
I, Jen,
entire
and everyone
board.
answered the
To the
email.
committee?
And nobody responded to the entire board when it got presented to us and
To
Dr.
the
Gordon
committee.
emailed us.
Well, I mean,
She asked to reach out to the committee and was denied the ability to reach out to the committee, actually.
maybe what we should have done was have our superintendent relay that to the committee. I mean, I could understand why the committee might be apprehensive and, you know.
So
Especially
that
when they're
information
accused of things.
was relayed to the superintendent, and the superintendent responded, as you know, because you were copied on the email.
Yes, I do.
As far as the response,
I don't think I did not
justifying why
get
it's
an
not
email.
sexually explicit, and he was part of the review process, so.
So where do we go from here? Just have a blank, no changes on here, so.
Well, I would like for sure to have students not on the committee. We can make that change, I hope. And I think that if there's some part, our current policy doesn't say certain books are put in an area for parental permission, if that's something maybe we want to add, you know, an area, whether it's guidance or not, that it's explicit but not explicit enough to be taken out of the walls of the building, but I don't believe that's where our current policy reads. And again, my concern is just that I don't know how this is deemed not explicit, because it does say clearly in the review, not explicit. And I guess I don't know how to be more specific than we were. I felt like we were pretty specific.
So I think the ask to the administration is, the administrative regulations violate policy by including a student on the committee. So the administrative regulations need to be consistent with policy and not have a student on it. And can the administration please put together language that that you feel would
More accurate
help
than enough.
help staff members categorize that description as sexually explicit? Because apparently we need language that explains what sexually explicit is. So could you put together language and then send that to us?
I disagree that, I think a student should remain on it. I think we're gonna censor their stuff, at least one of the students should have a little bit of say. They are 18 years old, and these are adults that are in this high school.
Well, only if
Majority
they
of
were-
adults are not in high school.
Okay, wait. If I would.
Majority of students are not adults.
No,
in high
majority of students, majority
But
of high
there
school
are some.
students are
There are
not
plenty
18
of
years old. I would suggest, if you're going to have a student stay on the committee though, to the point of, you don't want to expose students to stuff that we say that they shouldn't be exposed to, then I would say that if you choose to keep a student on the committee, that student has expressed parental permission to be on it, and the parent knows. That's what I would
I think it
ask.
doesn't make sense to have kids reviewing material you think isn't appropriate for kids. If it gets approved, then it goes into the library and then kids can sign it out.
Well, the student is, how many people are on the committee?
For this one, there were
7, I believe.
7? Well, it should be an
7,
odd number if you're
10.
going to have people
Can you
of
share
10.
what the makeup of the committee was? I don't remember.
It was 3 administrators, 3 professional staff, 3, 6, 7. It was 7. 3 administrators, 3 professional staff, and 1 student, a high school student.
So what I would say is that, we're talking about letting students make adult decisions about going to college or, enrolling in college, and, they're old enough to make these decisions and so on with their parental.
Which is age appropriate,
Wait, right, okay.
sexually explicit content.
Jordan, can I finish my thought, please? we all talk about parental involvement and parental choice and allowing parents to make decisions for their children.
Parents are a part of that.
Exactly. Parents are a part of
Just
that.
like if
So
they
I,
want
Their child to read a library book, they can get it.
and if a parent so chooses to allow their child through a discussion with that child, and I would say it should be a senior, so that the chances of them being 18 would be even better. But if a family decides amongst itself to allow their student to participate in this, then, I think we're kind of contradicting ourselves. We either want to give students the adult responsibility, but we don't. And we want to give parents the right to make these decisions, just the same way, again, that I was asked if I would allow my children to see parts of Saving Private Ryan in a classroom. We can't have it both ways. If you want parents to have the choice, then you actually have to live by that and give the parents the choice. If there's one student that has,
I
Again, that
would
just
generally
violates policy,
agree with
though.
that, but I disagree with the fact that if it is truly sexually explicit and inappropriate for children, even though there's some
Then
parents
make
might
it-
say, I
make
don't
it have
care,
to
I don't
be
know that as a
18.
school district, we say, well, as long as the parents are okay with it, we're not sure if this is appropriate, we're not sure if this is pornography, but we're gonna let a kid review it. Like, maybe if they're 18 or they're a senior, but I'm not sure why we would even open that door, because this isn't about taking an extra class or the other things we're talking about with parental choice. This is potentially something that some of these books would be rated X. I mean, we've removed some really raunchy
Well,
books.
the one book, I think
I'm
the
not sure
one
why we would
book,
leave that door open.
the one book did contain things that would be illegal for someone under 18, but
That's my
if
point.
you
So
wanna-
why,
if you
as a
wanna
school
make
district,
it-
I'm not sure why we would allow that for that possibility.
if you want to make it 18, then so be it. But, there are going to be people who, things are explicit, but what was just read to us even would not be, that would not be rated X. That would probably be rated R. And again, is it something that I would want my kids necessarily to go pick up and read? No, that's not going to be my top choice for them to dive into. But I think it would be content, certainly Kite Runner. I don't know what the rating on Kite Runner, the movie, was, but we were showing that to students in our classrooms. So, I think if it's kind
Okay,
of
so-
rated R, that's a parent and child decision.
So if we can move on, can we have the administration put together a definition of explicit that you think more clearly defines the term, and adjust the administrative regulations so that it is consistent with policy and doesn't include a student, which would violate our policy?
We will do that. Can I just provide that clarification about the student?
Sure.
The student was an upperclassman, and the parent permission was requested first and provided a copy of the book
Oh,
to assure that they knew what they were going to read and everything. So I
Understood.
just wanted to clarify that.
Understood,
Okay.
but it still violates policy to be having the kid read the book that violates the policy.
Not if it's parental.
No, because there isn't
it's
an,
not in
then
there.
you have to rewrite the policy. It doesn't give
Okay.
an exception for parental guidance or parental review.
We can clarify the AR, because the AR is the administrative regulation that supports the policy. So we can always clarify that administrative regulation without having to go through the approval of policy again.
So you
It
can,
is in the AR though.
Right, but the AR is not an approved, you don't approve AR.
Right.
You just, it supports the policy,
So-
so we can clarify that in the administrative regulation.
the definition is as well?
No, the definition piece we will have to come back to. I was just clarifying the student.
Because I'm thinking, actually, to your point, explicit is in there, you can define, you can address that concern in the administrative regulations and make both clear in the administrative regulations, and then we don't have to continue to move forward with any more changes to the policy.
We'll take a look at that for sure.
I did want to bring up one additional thing for policy 109. Again, just because I didn't, and maybe there's no support for it, but I just want to ask one more time about using third-party resources, that should be opt-in instead of opt-out.
Are you talking about 109 or surveys?
I mean, I feel like it would, I was told last time, I thought maybe it would go under surveys, but then it seemed like policy 109 would be where it would go for the third party.
I don't.
Because it would be
Are
considered.
you talking about
resource.
Nova, Jordan?
Yes, like Nova would be an example.
I agree with that. I'm just not sure. I don't know where it would go. I do remember what you're talking about though.
I think dealing with the NOPA curriculum, that needed to be board approved anyway, so that already is covered under a policy. Any curriculum that's brought into the district was supposed to be board approved. It never was board approved, so that was supposed to come to the board for approval. So in the future, that just needs to follow policy. I don't think that we necessarily need to adjust a different policy for that, but we can if you want to make that clear. I'm not sure exactly, can you clarify what language you're talking about adding?
I guess it would just be that any third party, anything coming in as a third party should receive opt-in instead of opt-out. Just like, the communication was sent to opt-out, but to change it to opt-in.
Underneath definition, it says resource materials shall include blah, 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 and other instructional and professional development resource materials. So it would seem like that would be covered under maybe instructional, but what's the word I'm looking for? Assemblies. We don't call them assemblies anymore, but you could add it there.
Yeah, what isn't this covered here? Parental consent must be obtained. Text, yeah, section. Supplementary resource materials is encompassed.
Right, it says other instructional and professional development, so it would be an instructional resource. So it's already covered in here.
And then Jonathan just pointed out that under elementary school, it says parental consent must be obtained for elementary school students before assigning any textbooks or supplementary resource materials containing implied written description of sexual acts for the purposes of teaching students to avoid or report. So that
No resource materials.
could be under there as well. I don't know if we have to be more specific for the third party, because it says that parental consent must be obtained,
Which is an opt-in.
which would be an opt-in, if you're considering that a supplementary resource.
Yeah, so again, I think it's already covered in here. I think it's just a matter of making sure that the implementation is consistent.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, then that brings us back to public comment.